Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
And we are back. It is Thursday night, 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It's time for the Audible Live here on blogtalkradio.com. Cecil Lammey returned after 2 weeks gone, and I've missed you guys. I've missed talking football with my peeps here on the Audible Live. Each and everyone out there, thank you very much for checking out the show, for checking out footballguys.com for all of your fantasy football information and chat room, which is lining up as I am opening the chat window now. Thank you, as always, for jumping on board as well. We've got a fantastic show tonight, a big show tonight for you. And as always, we'll be featuring two of the best and the brightest, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman. Bloom, baby, you're up.
See, this is the moment. And a lot of things that have been fermenting in our minds are becoming apparent to everybody out there. One big one, stay away from the Cardinals, all the Cardinals, every last one of them.
Stay away from Arizona. We actually have a question about Ryan Williams a little bit later, and we'll also be hearing from Matt Waldman. Matt, brother, what's good, man?
Man, well, we missed having you, and I can tell you I don't know what I missed more, you on the not being on the show, or the fact that I'm going to miss the Titans not playing the Cardinals every week. I've been loving watching our defensive ends just crash that line of scrimmage.
Crash down and wreak havoc, and that's what we're going to do on tonight's shows. We're going to wreak havoc, and we're going to talk fantasy leagues are firing up. We've had Fessel Alpha the other night. Fessel Bravo, I believe, was Sunday night. So many things getting fired up, so let's jump right into the news and notes. Remember, coming up in about a half an hour, the doctor is in. Dr. Gene Bramall will join the program. Hour number 2, we'll switch to your questions in the Shark Pool, the message boards at footballguys.com. First up, we're going to start with this MJD thing, and let's pass this thing around, okay? So all three of us chime in with their thoughts and opinions. I had a chance to be in a video teleconference with Maurice Jones-Drew yesterday. And I got to tell you, Bloom, I'll start with you. Matt, please jump in right after Bloom. MJD's comments sounded like a guy that's staying in Jacksonville. And really, you heard initially, oh, he's unhappy, Shad Khan, get on the train. And Maurice Jones-Drew, maybe, he's open to a trade. And then the next day you hear, he's probably open to sticking around. And at least from his demeanor, again, it was all fantasy football questions, Bloom. We couldn't ask him, like, when are you going to sign? Although I know some people tried to mix that into their questions, rant on that a little bit later. But the point is this, MJD, to me, Bloom, in an hour of answering questions, sounded like a guy. He kept talking about he kept talking about looking forward to the season and what he could do with Blaine Gabbert, the improved offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. What's your thoughts on this MJD situation? Because if it's good old, regular old MJD, your days of getting him in the mid-second round are quickly coming to a close.
And that's okay. You should welcome that, because I'm really tuned into something after a back and forth with Alfie Crow, who's certainly one of my most trusted voices on the Jags. We've talked about this I think we talked about this today with Lance Zierlein. I think that he is going to be in a timeshare with Rashad Jennings. I think it is going to be like the old MJD, Fred Taylor days. MJD would be a fine mid to late third-round pick as a running back, too. Like you said, as soon as he shows up, he's a late first, early second-round pick if he isn't already. No thanks.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Bloom in that case, because when you take a look at the situation, Rashad Jennings was injured last year. He didn't play at all. 2 years before that, Jack Del Rio was talking about he was had the best hands on the team. This is a guy who probably would have been a high-round draft pick if he didn't have to go to Liberty so that he could tend to his sick father, and he stayed at Pittsburgh. So he's definitely he was a viable prospect back in the day. And I think that with Jones-Drew and Rashad Jennings, it gives them a nice 1-2 punch that a lot of teams have in their offenses right now. And you can look to a team further south, or maybe what you would say maybe a little bit southwest of them in Tampa Bay, and see what happened when they only had one running back in LeGarrette Blount last year, because when Blount didn't do all that well, they didn't have the quality of players on that running back depth chart in Tampa to really provide any type of relief or a change up to him. And I think that having that continuity of Rashad Jennings and Maurice Jones-Drew was kind of like Ahmad Bradshaw and Brandon Jacobs. You can look at Arian Foster and Ben Tate, and it's the same kind of thing there. So I think that teams tend to like to copy each other if they see something like that where they can kind of rotate in. It doesn't mean that Maurice Jones-Drew wouldn't be worth at least a running back too, but I think where people may want to draft him, it might be too high because in the rush to judgment that he's back, all's back to normal.
All may not be back to normal. Quickly, does anyone of us three think he'll get traded at all? I mean, that talk died down pretty quick.
No. Ridiculous to begin with. No one's going to give him $20 million. It's not going to happen.
Right, not going to happen, and that means Denver or the Jets or the Falcons or the Lions or wherever he was suspected to go. Now, speaking of trade wins, Twitter is awesome. Twitter is cool. Follow the show on Twitter at The Audible. Me at Cecil Lammey, Sigmund at Sigmund Bloom, Matt at Matt Waldman. We keep it simple for you. That being said, there's a thread in the Shark Pool Bloom that says, Jim Irsay, please get off Twitter. The latest tweets coming from Irsay, trade win swirling, wide receiver need. Some people are saying Mike Wallace. Bloom, what do you say?
I don't believe it until Rob Lowe reports it.
Don't believe it until Rob Lowe reports it. So, Mike Wallace, do you believe, Bloom, that he'll show up after this third preseason game? He'll get into camp for the fourth one?
Yeah, and if you can get Wallace in the sixth round, maybe even mid to late fifth, if you're in a big play bonus yardage league for those long touchdowns, I think Wallace is to the point where he's a value now. I expect that all to blow over and get things back to normal for the Steelers' offenses. Speaking back to normal, Max Starks will be there, so the good old offensive line, then more things change.
Yeah, more things change, more they stay the same, and Mike Adams, come on, man.
Yeah.
Now, Matt, I will ask you this, because many people are saying, well, what about Mike Wallace when he does return? And he's got the playbook because he stopped by before the start of training camp and picked up a playbook. But a lot of people are saying, oh, no, what do we do here? How can he, get up to speed in this offense? I answer that, Matt, by saying, well, it's speed. He's a fast receiver that can get open. Matt, how concerned are you in Mike Wallace learning this Haley system?
I'm not concerned with him learning the Haley system at all because really Mike Wallace's game is built on the deep ball. It's the vertical routes, it's the deep crossing routes, some of the comeback routes that you're going to see there. But he's not running an ultra-sophisticated route tree in terms of what he is asked to do. He's asked to stretch the defense and allow Antonio Brown to work the underneath intermediate routes, Heath Miller to work some routes, Emmanuel Sanders. You get the idea there. The only thing that I'm worried about with Mike Wallace is that maybe his conditioning and the football conditioning that comes with practices and hitting and some of the things that might come into play there where you fear that he might pull a muscle because, these guys with lots of speed sometimes seem to be a little bit sensitive in terms of their ability to, pull a hammy, pull a calf, something of that nature because they might not have, had that everyday type of practice. But then you always kind of worry about it with these guys. So, when I look at it, maybe you drop him a little bit in fantasy drafts, but he's not a guy that I would just, wholesale say, I am not touching.
Now, we've got some preseason action going on this evening. Of course, Cincinnati, Green Bay. It's 27-13 right now. Jacksonville, Baltimore just scored 34-10. And then the aforementioned Tennessee versus Arizona. We'll talk about the goings-on in all of these games. Bloom, we got to see Cedric Benson for the first time. I called you a bitter Longhorn during Fessel Alpha when I had to get Cedric Benson. 6 for 38 at 6.3 a carry. It's the third week of the preseason, but so far with Benson, with this fit, coming across the newswire today at footballguys.com, James Starks could be on the bubble. Not terribly surprised by that, but your thoughts, your insight as to what you expect, what fantasy owners should expect from said Benson, because at the right spot, there becomes a point where he becomes a value, in my opinion. What about you, man?
Sure, in the 15th round, maybe. Cedric Benson has never impressed me, even while Cincinnati fed him repeatedly. Green Bay is not going to do that. Also, I don't think he's a great fit for what Green Bay does on offense. Green Bay is going to use all of their running backs, so they always do. I think that he's getting by on a reputation that never should have been that great to begin with. So Cedric Benson, after Evan Royster's gone, after Shane Vereen and Stephen Ridley are gone, I don't even know if I would take him ahead of Alex Green, to be honest. If there's a guy who's really going to hit out of that backfield, I don't see Cedric Benson hitting. Alex Green, maybe it's only a 5 or 10% chance, but I'm not taking Benson in any draft.
Now, I have a lot of respect for Alex Green and changing the game from Hawaii, but tonight, Bloom, and from what we've seen and read and heard from Green Bay, he doesn't seem to have the juice back after the knee injury. I mean, Benson is getting they're commenting on his work ethic. I mean, they're saying all the right things.
Right, but they're going to ease Alex Green in. They're going to use John Kuhn. We'll see if Brandon Sane get healthy. I just think that even if they had a talent on the rise, I don't know that I would be that excited about any running back in Green Bay. And a talent on the decline like Benson, I just don't see it happening. May there be some touchdowns in there, some decent games? Sure. Was he somebody I would ever think about plugging in my lineup and leaving in? No. He's somebody you would put in desperation in a bye week or injury. And I just think that the combination's bad, and I was never on board with Benson to begin with.
Matt, if we talk about Green Bay, when are they going to trade for a backup quarterback? Because Graham Harrell went 5 of 12 for 26 yards tonight. Not that B.J. Coleman has torn up the universe and been this sort of superstar. Graham Harrell's just bad, man. And, a lot of people saying, well, McCarthy, give him time. He's had the time. He still looks like crap. Matt, what are they going to do? I mean, it's a big concern here behind Rodgers.
I think it is a concern for them, but again, this is a team that seems to have a pretty good comfort level with its personnel, and people have questioned them before about some of the things that they've done, and it's turned out aces for them. So you have to realize that B.J. Coleman might be a player that they feel like can be ready in a couple of years, and I know that this season's the most important part of the year, and if they don't have Aaron Rodgers at some point in the season, this ship could be sunk for a while. But again, you look at this and you have to realize that they must see something in Harrell that they feel confident about in terms of that he's going to be able to do in once the regular season rolls around, or that they just feel comfortable enough with Rodgers that that he's not going to get hurt. To me, it's a scary proposition, but sometimes you just have to look at what you have in terms of your personnel and roll with whatever that weakness is. And considering they have such a huge strength, up top, maybe they just feel comfortable enough with that risk right now.
Well, let's move on and talk more about Jacksonville. It's a Jaguars show tonight. And I want to talk on Justin Blackmon. And Bloom, your thoughts here. He's getting force-fed the football by Blaine Gabbert. Is your ranking of Blackmon changing? Is it getting enhanced? Are you getting a little more excited about Blackmon's prospects this season?
A little more. I've been adjusting him back up into that 10th, 11th round range. Around the same time, you might be looking at flyers like Randall Cobb. I would consider Justin Blackmon. I think the main variable here is whether the somewhat effective Blaine Gabbert we've seen this preseason does carry over. It's possible. I mean, certainly more possible than if he looked like he did last year during the preseason this year. I'm still not that excited about Blackmon, that excited about this Jaguars passing game, and I would consider him maybe as a wide receiver 5 to take and see what happens.
Roll the dice and get that lottery ticket out and scratch away. And, of course, they're taking on Baltimore. Always a Tuscan Raider. Always a tough task, Matt, because I can speak English. We look at Baltimore's backup running back situation. Everyone loves handcuffs, and everyone loves Ray Rice. And why not, Matt? He's awesome. But behind him, Bernard Pierce hasn't looked that good. I had my Week 2 Dark Phoenix, Damian Barry, had 7 for 40 tonight. So, Audible alum, Damian Barry right here on this show, a guy with that speed, actually gained, how big has he gotten now, Matt? He's about 30 pounds heavier than he was in college at the U. So Barry's there. Of course, Bobby Rainey's there. He's had some plays in space as a receiver, certainly 3 for 73, that long of 48, and a touchdown tonight. So maybe that's your change of pace back. Are you saying don't handcuff anybody if you're a Rice owner, or is there one of these guys you think I'll take a gamble on and handcuff him a little bit later?
Yeah, I would wait till late, and I would go with Bobby Rainey because, even though his stats, his box score may look a certain way, and there's some plays in space that he made that counted, there were also plays in the interior line that also didn't count that he's made in the past 3 preseason games that have been quite good. So you look at that, you factor in how he's looked in practice, the way that Jim Harbaugh says that he looks good between the tackles, and I have to feel good about that, especially based on, what we've seen from him at Western Kentucky in a pro-style offense, especially with the high level of carries that he's got over the years.
Well, Bloom, I'm going to spoil a question for a little bit later, but if we're looking at the games that are going on tonight, and we talk about the Tennessee Titans, Jake Locker there, 8-16, $124, 2 touchdowns, no picks, certainly performing better than Matt Hasselbeck. There's some things to be excited about with Locker. For fantasy purposes, a high upside QB2, where do you like drafting him? What are your thoughts? How soon can this guy become very fantasy relevant, where he's a real option to start, not just a backup, just a name you grab late?
It can happen right away, and this is something we've been covering pretty thoroughly this offseason, mainly the Chris Palmer installing run-and-shoot looks, those kind of concepts in this pass offense, having a full offseason to do it. We know they have talent there. Kenny Britt, Kendall Wright, Nate Washington, Jared Cook, Chris Johnson, a great receiver out of the backfield, former wide receiver. We know that Locker's mobile. We know that Locker's bold throwing downfield. And tonight he's looked efficient, too, which is something he did not do last week. And surprisingly, the team still installed him as the starter for the regular season after that performance. So I think that he's a terrific quarterback to target as your second quarterback. He may not go until the 18th, 20th quarterback off the board. You can wait until 13th round or later, probably, although after tonight his ADP could trend up. You just have to know the quarterback, the kind of quarterback you're backing up. If you're backing up a more durable, safe quarterback like a Matt Ryan or Phillip Rivers, then Locker is a good upside play. If you're backing up a Michael Vick or Robert Griffin III, somebody who's got risk, maybe Locker isn't the ideal second quarterback for you because he has a little bit of risk himself. But I think that another thing you can look at, too, is if you are going quarterback by committee and you wait too long and maybe you have to have Ben Roethlisberger as your starter and you're not happy about that, you can double up in the next 2 rounds and take Andrew Luck and Jake Locker, and that's about where I have Locker ranked at the same level as Andrew Luck.
Bloom, you brought up Matt Ryan in that take, and I'm not going to bring up any specific names. Warmer! Sorry, something in my throat. Is this Matt Ryan hype train out of control? I mean, we're seeing him drafted as the second quarterback off the board. Is that a little much, Bloom? Should people pump their brakes a little?
It depends. This is one of those ones where you need to know your draft. If you're drafting with other football guys, I think the football guys in general community is getting pretty high on Matt Ryan. And he had a great performance last week, another great performance this week where they have a more rapid-fire New Orleans, New England, Green Bay style pass offense that spreads the field and really puts the defense on their heels. And Matt Ryan's looking like, he is the clear quarterback 6 with Michael Vick getting banged up, in my opinion. And if you're talking about 6-point per pass touchdown leagues, he even more clearly is the number 6 quarterback. Now, getting a lot of questions today about where he's going to go. It could be as high as 3rd round or 4th round. I think 5th round is still most likely. You may still see him in the 6th or 7th round in leagues where people aren't in the know. But if you want him, you take him in the 5th round. And this is important to underscore because if he hits this year, he'll be a value in the 5th round. He'll be a value in the 4th round. So if you like him, I understand the reason to put your money where your mouth is, especially in 14, 16-team leagues where those quarterbacks can dry up quickly.
Well, let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. We talked about Jake Locker, but, Matt, I really want your opinion on Chris Johnson. Now, on this show, all off-season long, as this is the 111th show tonight, and we've had 37 episodes, if memory serves, released this month in August, and it's the 23rd. So we've got some more coming as well. Point is this. We've talked plenty about Chris Johnson staying with the team, not going to Orlando, working out. I've got confidence in Chris Johnson's renewed focus. My concerns, Matt, come from the offensive line because we've not seen a lot of holes. 13 carries, 27 yards in the regular season dress rehearsal. How concerned are you about the Titans' offensive line and the impact on opening those holes for one Chris Johnson, Matt?
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. They did add Steve Hutchinson, who has, been one of the better guards, as a run blocker for quite some time, but he is getting up there in age. I find that what ends up happening here is that when they run power plays, when they pull one of the guards, that seems to be an issue. Chris Johnson doesn't seem to be quite as good at those plays, and neither does the line. The line seems to be late when they pull the guard, especially the right guard moving to the left. He seems to be a little bit late, at least in this game, getting to the hole. He gets pushed back immediately, met by somebody, and then that forces Johnson to have to go a little bit further outside. But when they run more of a zone concept, he seems to have a little bit of success. But again, they're running a lot to the edges. They're not running inside, and they're going to have to show that they can run it inside like they used to 2-3 years ago in order for Chris Johnson to have the type of years that he had in the past. So, yes, he's still probably the scariest player in the first round for me to want to draft, and I seem to move him up and down a couple of spots depending on the week and what I'm seeing or hearing. But he's still a top 10, top 12 player in the draft, but he's someone that you have to feel like you're really confident in him to take him. And at this point, I'm not as confident and know that I feel like I can get good running back elsewhere. I know that, we talk about the lack of depth, but I also feel like that the lack of, stability for guys to stay healthy at the position is such a, low point for the position that you're bound to do pretty well if you pick a lot of players in the mid to late rounds at the running back position.
Matt, you talked about your draft slot. I want to know your least favorite draft slot. Let's assume it's a 12-team league. If you're not playing in a 12-team league, stop, okay? Want to bump that up a little bit because 8 teams, 10 teams, not enough. Bump it up to 12, or maybe it's even a 14. For me personally, it's 4. I hate 4. So, of course, the fantasy gods would laugh at me when Cecil Alpha, we did our dice roll, and Woodrow sends out the email, Matt, I get pick number 4. And that's why I've got Cedric Benson on my roster. Point is this, Matt, your least favorite draft slot, if it's 1 through 12 or if it's like Cecil Alpha, 1 through 14, where's the spot you don't like to be in?
I think for me, I actually like 4, but I had 4 in Fessel Bravo, and I think I did pretty well. But for me, it's actually around the 7 to 8 range. I don't particularly like that. I'm more of a bookend guy. I like one end or the other where I can double up at one time and kind of set the trend or react, or just kind of see the purview of what's happening. But to me, somewhere between 8 and 9, it's not quite close enough to that end that I like, but it's not close enough to the beginning, and I just feel like I'm always constantly, where if I'm drafting at my worst, I'm dealing with runs that I don't guess right.
Bloom, you were sitting at 5 in Fessel Alpha. Yes. I believe you were 1 right behind me. Where's your least favorite spot? Because I was quite uncomfortable at 4. I tried to make it happen, and I'm somewhat happy with my team. I need some waiver wire help at running backs, or I need to trade Andrew Luck for some running backs. Point is this. I made it happen at 4. I wasn't happy about it. Bloom, where's your least favorite draft slot?
I'm not really liking the turn this year, 11 or 12 in a 12-team league. Unfortunately, Chris Johnson and Darren McFadden are both getting pushed up enough that you're not seeing them fall. You're probably not seeing Rodgers or Brady or Graham, probably not Calvin Johnson. You're going to take a running back like DeMarco Murray or Matt Forte, who, to be honest, I don't think are that much better than the running backs you can get in the 3rd round. So I'm not a big fan of that spot. And the other thing is you're situated at the end of the 3rd, early 4th round where you may not get one of the last second-tier running backs like a Fred Jackson or a Marshawn Lynch. You may have to settle for an Ahmad Bradshaw. And then at the top of the 4th, I think the pick is Brandon Lloyd, but I also think you can get Lloyd in the mid to late 4th. So you're taking him a little earlier than you have to. So I'd rather not be at the turn.
Bloom, you were cussing in the chat room. I assume, not in this chat room, in Fessel Alpha chat room. I assume you wanted Andrew Luck. Am I right in assuming that?
No. You mean, so sometimes when I do these online live drafts, sometimes it gets a little quiet, like Rodney Dangerfield tugging on the tie, and it's a tough room. And sometimes just to make sure everybody's awake, I'll just let a string of expletives out just to see if people are paying attention.
Oh, and here I thought I was like, yeah, because I think I took Luck right in front of you in the 9th round. I was like,
right.
Bloom must have wanted that, and now you were just cussing for Rodney Dangerfield.
It's just draft Tourette's.
Draft Tourette's. And we had Clayton Gray channeling David Dodds. It's great because you got to be active. Like, if you're doing the online chat, especially if it's coworkers or buddies or whatever, maybe not so much people you have no idea who they are, but the point is that you gotta mix it up, man. You got to talk. You got to have some fun with it. That's the whole point of drafting. Referencing the video conference call, which for Brent Selleck, and I swear to God, I did not ask him about his shoes. He was asked a question about shoes, to which he answered, this is no shut your mouth. He answered about a pair of Italian loafers, I wish I was rich enough to know what he was talking about, that obviously you don't tie. So there's the audible joke in that with Brent Selleck. But Bloom, the point is this on Jared Cook. He was asked about Jared Cook, and Brent Selleck said, well, Cook's got some stuff to learn, and he's got the talent, but hasn't put it all together. We've seen plenty of these teases go down in Audible history, guys that are extremely athletic, and we follow them from college, and we can't wait to see them go to the pros, and then they just don't quite put it together. Dynasty-wise, what's your insight on Jared Cook?
Dynasty-wise, he's still the kind of player I like to have on my bench being the key word there, because of the talent and the natural ball skills and things like that. Although he remains a tease, he's not somebody that I would hitch my wagon to as a number one tight end. And we did a Google Hangout with Lance Earline today, and we talked about Jared Cook, and Matt put it really well when he said he just doesn't know how to play the tight end position. And I think that is why we only see him on the field 20 or 25% of the time. He's just not a two-way player. He's not trustworthy. He's not somebody who you can count on to be where he's supposed to be when he's supposed to be there. And that's why I think that we continue to see him tease, have occasional big games, but not really follow through. So I will never deny that Jared Cook has the natural ball skills and physical gifts to be almost as good as a Jimmy Graham or Rob Gronkowski. But there's a lot of reasons to think he'll never achieve it.
There's the what might have been with fantasy players, and it's for, maybe not being mature, not putting together. Maybe it's injury. I always remember Marcus Dupree and how fantastic, best it never was. I mean, and Marcus Dupree, one of those rare players like an Adrian Peterson that probably could have made the jump from high school to pros, and I don't say that about a lot of people. In fact, only two. Three, DJ Williams probably could have as well. With Jared Cook, it's getting the feeling like he may be another one of those guys, a guy that we don't want to be that guy. Speaking of Adrian Peterson likability, some good news, well, it's news anyway, Matt, about Trent Richardson. Expected to play week 1, but likely will have his workload limited. This knee injury in the preseason, of course, we haven't seen Trent Richardson. Everyone's excited to see Trent Richardson. So when we see Trent Richardson, Matt, what will we get?
I think what we're going to get is some promising runs that's going to make people ooh and ah and salivate, but not enough for them to really make an impact in the box score, other than maybe as a low-end running back to more likely a flex play at best. And I think that's because this offense is going to really have to get off the ground and get some rapport. You're still dealing with a rookie at quarterback, 3 receivers that are in their first 2 to 3 years in the league, and that's going to have an impact. I mean, certainly the line has done well enough to be able to help out Peyton Hillis and Jerome Harrison. The 3 out of the past 4 years, those guys were high-end running back 2s or running back 1s in the league without a good passing game. But again, this is his first game. He's coming off of a knee surgery. I don't think you should expect much from him the first couple of weeks. Let him surprise you. And in terms of drafts, I think some people like Maurice Jones-Drew are going to pounce a little bit higher than they should. And I've learned my lesson with rookie running backs. I mean, I think I've been chasing Edgerrin James ever since I picked him way back when as a high first-round pick, and it paid off handsomely for me, and realized that you have to be a little bit more patient with these guys and hold off. And even though if you might expect number 1 ability from them, soon, you really have to tamper back your expectations to be, low-end running back twos to feel like you're going to get any value out of them.
2 hours of fantasy greatness, and of course, at half hour past, we always go to the Infinity of Denver VIP line. That's what we'll call it for now. And we got to talk to this guy.
I think it's time to let them know who you are. I'm the diggy doctor, pumping it, yes, y'all. DOC on necessity, kicking fresh, y'all. Letting the bass be yo and flow with those so I can play. Leaving the rest of DJ Dr. Dre. It's the diggy doctor.
I love that song, and I love this man, Gene Bramall. What's up, dude?
I just came out of my garage after doing an autopsy on this chupacabra-looking thing that I pulled out underneath my deck that's been stinking up my backyard for days. But how are you guys?
Skunk, badger? I mean, what are we talking about here?
My guess is it was a groundhog. It was too big to be anything else, but it had chupacabra-like teeth, so, I don't know. Central Ohio, you don't usually see that stuff, but, who knows?
Nice. Well, let's jump into the injury talk around the National Football League. Latest on Jason Witten is they're going to look to some doctors. They say he's 50-50 to play week 1. No surgery. Gene, your thoughts on Witten and the spleen injury and how delicate of a situation this is for Witten and for the Cowboys?
Well, it certainly was a delicate situation at the beginning, as we talked about and hinted at, last week when it first happened. I think Thursday night, the spleen is an issue, that there's a lot of bleeding around that, and it's not something that it's easy to stop on its own if it's a significant laceration. There's lots of grades of these things, and there was no way to know for sure what Witten had. It certainly looked like a low-grade splenic laceration, but it was hard to say. But I think the news that we got today that suggested that, if 7 days after the injury they're already saying that he doesn't need surgery, as we talked about last week, delayed rupture, the risk of that extends out to 10 days to 14 days even in certain situations. So it's very likely that he had the most minor of lacerations at this point. And at one point we were speculating that it might not be until after week 4, after that bye week, 6 to 8 weeks, that he'd be able to come back. But if they're already being as reassured as they seem to be about the healing process, that's a pretty good sign that it wasn't that significant of an injury. And what we're waiting on now is for that blood to resorb and the area around the spleen itself to heal. And I think it's very likely that we could be looking at a 3, 4, 5 week injury now instead of a 6 to 8. I think it's very likely we see him back before the bye week. Week 1 is still pretty unlikely. He's really not been doing anything at all over these last 7 to 8 days. He's going to need to condition himself a little bit, and Dallas has that very early game in week 1. So I think probably they're going to give him the benefit of those extra, 9, 10 days to recover. Week 2 is possible, still not out of the range to expect to see week 3, week 4. Everybody heals a little bit differently, and that blood resorbs at a little bit different rate. So that's going to be the next thing we hear. But the nice thing about this injury is they will not let him on the field until he is fully recovered, until that blood is gone, and any indication that that spleen has a little bit of a nick in it is gone as well. So when he comes back and when he makes it through his conditioning process, when he gets back on the field, this is probably going to be behind him.
Gene, before Dravid Best, there was Austin Collie. And while Austin Collie didn't do much for us last year, there were a lot of signs that he was ready to be the number 1 receiver, possibly, for Andrew Luck, which could be an 80, 90, even 100-catch player. But alas, he had another concussion. Now, we're not hearing anything specific negative yet, although the question's asked of whether someone's going to keep playing, and his father said, yeah, he's going to keep playing as long as the Colts want him. Where are you at here? Because I still think that Colley's worth a pick in the 11th, 12th round, but would someone be wise to just stay away from him completely?
I don't think I'd stay away from him completely. At 11th, 12th round, I'd seen him going in that 7th and 9th range prior to this injury, so I think discounting him a tier or more is reasonable. As good as Andrew Luck has looked, Collie is a viable wide receiver 3, maybe even better than that. Certainly he's worthy as a flex play at this stage. Where to go from here? I think I would approach this the same way we've approached Javid Best, which is, they'll say that he's day-to-day, and he is, but that day-to-day in Collie's situation probably means week to week, not necessarily because it's clear that he had a worse concussion or for any other reason, but we just know that they're likely to be very, very cautious with him based on how his 2010 season ended. There isn't anything that suggests he's going to be out a length of time, but I can't see them putting him back on the field next week against the Bengals in the preseason on Thursday. So I think the next real indication we're going to get is, has he been cleared to do football-related activities that Monday practice, that Tuesday practice the first week? If he's not cleared for contact by that first Wednesday practice participation report of week 1, then we have to stop and wonder, not only is this day-to-day, but is it month-to-month? For now, you're getting him at a roster spot or 2 discount. If you can get him as your wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5, and you've got 3 guys ahead of him that that you can trust for a week or 2 if need be, then maybe it's worth the risk. As you get down in that area, after you're looking at the Nate Washingtons, the Justin Blackmans, the Sidney Rices, Malcolm Floyds, once you get past that particular tier, I don't have a problem taking him over a guy like Warren Robinson or any of the other PPR guys like Danny Amendola or others that we've seen go in that 11 to 13 round range. I think that's the right spot to consider him, and I would put him right back up where he was if it looks like he's cleared for contact pretty quickly.
Gene, this week Steve Smith was on crutches a couple of days ago. Then it was mentioned that he had a foot infection, and now they're talking about him probably practicing tomorrow after responding well to antibiotics. Going from crutches to practicing in that short of period of time, can you talk a little bit about infections, especially foot infections a little bit, and what you suspect is going on there?
Well, foot infection could be any number of things. It could be something like an ingrown toenail where the area around the toe got infected. It could be that he had a blister that the skin got infected. Certainly we've heard a lot about these MRSA infections, resistant staph infections that make their way around locker rooms in similar areas that become difficult to treat and can be, a longer-term infection to get taken care of. There's not been any indication that's going on with Smith. It seems like it's a pretty minor situation. Oftentimes, they'll put you on crutches just so that for pain control more than anything else. It's not a situation where if your skin is infected that they want you to bear some weight on it. The other possibility is it was a deeper infection. They had to open it up a little bit. Whether they probably, we generally don't stitch those things in that situation, and they'd want him off of it again for that purpose. But with him coming back so quickly, that sounds a little bit unlikely. So it's hard to parse out exactly what might be going on in this situation, but it's a good thing that he's able to come off crutches and go to practice so quickly. And we'll know very soon whether or not it's an issue that's likely to linger, recur, or hinder him. If he's able to get through a full practice pretty quickly after coming off the crutches, there's nothing to worry about.
He's Dr. Gene Bramall. He's officially awesome. You can check him out at footballguys.com and, of course, BramallSecondOpinion.com. Gene will move to a running back that everybody loves. We all love Adrian Peterson. Now, he's reportedly experienced no swelling in his left knee after practicing. A good sign for this fantastic running back who expects to be ready by week 1 and going to get some contact. It's been kind of almost a quarterback treatment out at the Vikings practice, but he's going to get some contact this next week. No swelling in this situation. Are we looking at it too rosy? Are you becoming more confident in Adrian Peterson? Your thoughts there on the fantastic ADP?
I think we're still where we've been from the beginning. I think, it's worth tempering expectations. Peterson is the one that's been pushing. I'm okay, I can get back. Let me do this a little bit sooner. From the beginning, the coaching staff and the training staff have tried to temper those expectations. I have never heard or seen anything like a running back take reps with pads on with no contact. I'm not sure what that gets for Peterson. It almost seems like the coaching staff may be trying to appease him by letting him do a little bit more than he was able to do the day before. The reason to get him back in the pads is to get him reconditioned to having unexpected things happen to him. What's he going to do if he gets hit from an unexpected angle? What's he going to do when his footing is not secure in the trash? How is his knee going to react to that? How is his brain going to react to that? How's the combination of those things going to react to that? We talk a lot about the position sense taking 6 to 9 to 12 or sometimes even longer in terms of months to come back, where your brain gets the right signals from your knee to tell your balance systems where you are. And I think, those are the things that we're still waiting on with Peterson. It's very good that he's continued to increase his rehab from straight running to cutting to off to the side to non-contact padded practices. But until we see him get hit, until we see him do successive practices after moving around a little bit, I think, we can't say for sure how he's going to behave and how well he'll look during the year. I think that there continues to be every indication that he's going to be brought back very slowly during the regular season. They don't want to risk him in the preseason at all. We've heard that once again. Now he's going to dress but stand on the sidelines. I think they're just trying to keep Peterson engaged. And, we have to stop. We're still talking 8 to 9 months after a pretty significant injury by the time the regular season starts. So expect his carries to be limited for the first 2, 4, maybe even 6 weeks. And I think, we're not going to have a good idea of exactly what he's going to look like until we actually see what he's going to look like.
Similar sort of question, Gene. Timeline's a little different, but now we have some hard information about Kenny Britt. And the word is that in week 1, if he's eligible to play week 1, which I still think is unlikely, he could play 10 to 15 snaps. So talk about how that makes you think he's doing in general, and then with the prospect of having him suspended for 2 to 4 games, current ADP, at least as of a few days ago, Britt was going in the late 7th, early 8th round of PPR leagues, 12-team leagues. How does that make you feel? Value, overvalued, undervalued? And just what's your approach to Britt in drafts right now?
Well, first, I don't see any way Britt plays week 1. Certainly the suspension is in the background there. Whether or not that will be decided by opening weekend remains to be seen. But, based on what he told reporters this week, he feels like his ACL, the knee that he had the ACL surgery on, and the scar tissue removal on back in May, feels fine. But the issue is that the knee scope that he had in June is still a problem. And that's a little bit of an issue. We're going on almost 8 weeks after that scope now, and he's still struggling to get back from that. That suggests that, either he's going to have some lingering problems all year long, or it was a little bit more extensive procedure than what was originally reported. With him not being back on the field with his teammates, he's a guy that we know has had issues with muscle strains in the past, going through all those reconditioning issues with 2 knees that maybe aren't quite right and haven't gone through that full length of rehabilitation yet. I think, week 1 would be very, very unusual. I think we're probably looking at 2 to 4 weeks into the season before we see him, and then we may see, the suspension on top of that. So, if we see him before week 6, I think it's a good thing. But I doubt that's going to happen. In terms of where you take him, again, much like Collie, I think that depends on what you think about the rest of your roster. If you're very happy with 3 or 4 wide receivers that you already have, and you're willing to take a risk on a guy like Britt, who, if he's there for you in the playoffs, is arguably a top 12 to 15 wide receiver, then I think that's a reasonable risk. I've done that in a couple of drafts recently. I've seen Sig do that in a couple of drafts recently, where he's fallen into that 11th, 12th, and 13th round. And if you're looking for a depth player and you're happy with how your bye weeks shake out and the flex plays that you've got in those first 8 to 10 rounds, then there's really no bigger upside play than Britt. He may blow up in your face, but you could say that about any number of the other running backs and wide receivers that you're thinking about taking that area. So, hopefully he gets back a little bit sooner than that. If he does, so much the better. But at this point, if you're thinking about taking Kenny Britt, you're thinking about taking him for the stretch run in the playoffs rather than the first month of the year.
Gene, to segue from a good fantasy football player to an honest-to-goodness good football player, let's talk about Navarro Bowman, the linebacker at San Francisco, and for some of us IDP leaguers out there, he reportedly has a knee issue and is going to miss the preseason game. Have you heard about the severity of that?
No, I'm not sure what's going on with Bowman. It could be nothing more than one of those things where, especially a guy like him that we've seen how well he's played over the last 12 months, same defensive scheme. They know what's going on there in that front 7. Those guys are likely to take every snap that they can during the regular season. I haven't heard if it's any sort of a significant knee sprain that could keep him out for a couple of weeks or more, but we'll know a little bit more about that like so many other situations. If he's deemed comfortable enough to come back in week 4, that's a very good thing, knowing that most teams and players don't go more than a series or 2 in that final preseason week. But, if he's unable to, I think the good thing would be let's see him get back to practice next week, whether or not he plays in Thursday night's game, and then we'll go from there.
He's Dr. Gene Bramall. You're listening to the Audible Live, blogtalkradio.com, 2 hours of fantasy greatness. here with Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Blue, Matt Waldman, and Gene Bramall. Darren Sproles. If it was the regular season, he'd be okay. The Saints are saying this is really no big deal. We're not seeing Darren Sproles, though, and that has some fantasy owners nervous. Gene, how nervous are you?
I'm not that nervous. I think I'll buy that Darren Sproles doesn't have an issue that's anything more than the Saints being cautious with him. Going back and watching the two plays before he went out, he didn't come back in for, I think it was either the second or third series, didn't come back on the field. Looks like he got his legs twisted under him a little bit. Maybe that first of those last two plays was the issue. I think he got rolled up on a little bit, but I didn't see anything, similar to what we saw with Carlos Dunlap or Jermaine Gresham, where you could clearly see what sort of sprain happened and then it was likely significant. I think, again, like so many veteran players, no reason to push them if they've got a little bit of ding. So much the better to keep them out, make sure that they don't have a conditioning or cascade type injury. I tend to believe what the Saints are saying at this point. Haven't even heard that he needed an MRI or any other imaging, so I think it's very likely that we'll be seeing him in week 1.
All right, Gene. Another big one, and it feels like we can just keep going for the next hour and a half with all these injury issues and how they're affecting our draft. Since we last spoke, at least on the non-IDP side, the Steelers activated Rashard Mendenhall. And there's a ton of angles to look at here, but the main two are you have Isaac Redmond talking about this hip injury maybe affecting him throughout the season. And then there's still reports that Mendenhall won't be ready to play until week 3, week 4, but it does indicate maybe some desperation on the Steelers' part. Has the Pittsburgh backfield just fallen in with that stay away category? You don't even really want to mess with it this year?
Well, I think we're getting there, at least until one of these guys says something reassuring and then shows it on the field in the early weeks of the season. Desperation is a harsh word, but I think it's not unreasonable in this situation. I think all this move does, knowing that Mendenhall, even though he didn't have quite as severe injury as Peterson, it doesn't seem like he's quite as far along in his rehab. And again, rehab is extremely variable depending on when these guys get back. They're saying from the beginning that they don't expect him to be back for 2, 4, maybe even 6 weeks. What this does, it buys them some time. It allows them that as soon as he's ready to get back on the field and practice with those guys, and if it's in 3 weeks, great. If it's in 4 weeks, okay. If it's 6 weeks, then they really didn't lose anything but a roster spot through that period of time. And I think this says more to me about Jonathan Dwyer, Isaac Redmond, where they are not just injury-wise, and both of them had durability issues, but about how they've played on the field. They've both shown flashes of being able to carry a heavy load for the Steelers, a team that, they'll do some passing for sure, but they would like to be able to move the ball on the ground as well. But a lot of inconsistency as well. It seems like Isaac Redmond can't stay on the field for a couple of practices in a row. Dwyer has continued to have some injury problems, and he hasn't looked extremely good either. So I think, again, desperation, a little bit strong word, but it's clear that I don't think they'd be taking a risk with Mendenhall by bringing him back and exposing him to practice, which is what they want to do, earlier than he comes off the PUP list, unless they thought that they might need him sooner than week 10, week 12, week 14.
Gene, Michael Vick has been injured the past 2 preseason games, and the last one was really an egregious deep throw, kind of a desperation heave as he was taking contact. And I kind of have a theory that quarterback like Vick, with the just great natural arm and the terrific mobility, he's the type of player that I've seen over and over again just wait to the last minute to make a throw under heavy fire and use all arm and take a huge hit and get hurt. And I look at him, and then I look at Robert Griffin, who often took ungodly punishment at Baylor for doing a similar thing. And I'm wondering if you think there's any legs to that theory that somebody who has that kind of athleticism that may not have, may kind of go all out or expose their body to more injury. I'd say that even Darren McFadden did that at the running back position with the high pad level, taking more hits. And then when you're that fast and you're exposing your body to that kind of punishment because you're not protecting it in a natural way where you got the angles down, that you're exposing yourself to more dangerous hits at a speed that can create more damage. Do you think there's anything that flies with that?
Well, I think it's likely that players that feel like they're more athletic than anybody else on the field might be a little bit more likely to take those risks. But we see guys like Ben Roethlisberger and any number of other players put themselves in similar positions. Some of it is, maybe they have a little bit more heart. Maybe they're a little bit more athletic, but I think there's a lot of different things that go into that. I think there's probably some truth to, an athletic player being a little bit more likely to put themselves and being able to get themselves in that position to start with. But I don't know that that's the only factor involved. And I think you hit the nail on the head with Vic here. We're talking about the second preseason game. He's spinning away from the pocket before he needs to. He's running into a hit and trying to throw the ball 50 yards downfield to Deshaun Jackson, who really wasn't all that open. I think it's a symptom of the problem that we've seen off and on with Vic for years. For a brief period in 2010, he seemed willing to stand in the pocket and get rid of the ball before he needed to and not take those big hits. We didn't see any of that last year. We didn't see any indication that he was made much improvement in reading blitzes. I don't think there's anything to be worried about with this particular rib injury since it's not a broken bone or a cartilage issue. It's going to be painful for a couple of weeks, and I fully understand why he says he's only 80% today, a few days after the injury. But this isn't something that should really linger 4 to 6 weeks. The other thing that I thought was interesting to me is that Andrew Reid pretty much said in his press conference that Vic was armored up. One of the companies that Vic sponsored would later deny that, at least said that he didn't have their particular armor on. But I wonder if that has something to do with, how willing Vic is to put himself into a situation where he might take a little bit hit. Does he feel like he's got, he's wearing Kevlar now and that he could take a little bit more of a hit? I don't know if that's the case or not. But between that potential issue, the way he's playing in the pocket, even though this particular injury may not keep him out of a regular season game, it's almost impossible to bet on him playing 16 this year.
My big concern with Michael Vick is when you start thinking and stop reacting and you're worried about taking that hit, worried about, sliding or what have you, and not just being the playmaker that you are, it takes away from that elite playmaking skills. Now, I am no doctor, Gene, as you know this. Not even close, although I have done some C-sections, plenty of castrations, and even fixed some prolapses, but we won't talk about the pig farm now, Gene, and discuss to our listeners. But I want to know, Brian Urlacher sought treatment in Europe, reportedly sought treatment for his knee in Europe during the spring in hopes of avoiding surgery. This Urlacher knee situation seems very dire. And again, I mean, is in Europe, would he be looking at some stem cell therapy, something like that? Like, why go overseas? And what's your thoughts and opinions on Urlacher?
Well, what he went to do was to get the equivalent of, it's not exactly platelet-rich plasma treatment, but what they do is they took a sample of his own blood, they put it in a centrifuge, which is essentially a big Ferris wheel, and they spin it around for a while and let the blood separate. And they're trying to get a very thin layer of growth factors and regeneration factors that are in your blood, but they try to concentrate it. So tissue factors that help with healing, tissue factors, and probably include some stem cells that will help regenerate whatever's going on in there. And the hope is that by putting that concentrated healing factor part of the blood back directly near that knee where it needs it most, that he's a little bit likely to heal. And this myth that we've seen, this has been going on for years and years and years, but there's been mixed results with it. Some people, there's been studies that suggest that it's been very effective with certain injuries if it's done in a certain way. Other studies suggest that it's no better than anything else that they might put in there or doing nothing at all. The reason he needs to go to Germany to do that is because the FDA here is very restrictive about what you can do with those sort of blood products and stem cell products. And to get that particular type of treatment here, to get those studies done, to get it approved, the regulation is just such that it's not available here yet. And these guys don't have the luxury of waiting to find out whether or not, another 4 or 5 years of studies proves that one method is better than another. This particular doctor out in Germany has had some success, whether it's placebo or true, with guys like Kobe Bryant and Alex Rodriguez and a number of other players, named and unnamed. And so when the player is in a situation where getting towards the end of career, they want to extend for a couple of years, even younger guys, they want to get over whatever's going on. This is not an uncommon situation where these guys go over and get that. We talked about it with Peyton Manning going over for a stem cell treatment in Europe as well. I think, the larger point related to Brian Urlacher is, we've known he's had knee injuries for a while. This is not something, if you read through what the doctors that do this procedure say, essentially what they're trying to do is take away inflammation. And this was something that one of the ESPN bloggers, with the help of one of the doctors that knows a little bit more about this procedure, had to say today, is that then to go back and open up that knee, put a knife in there, and do whatever was done is something that's going to cause inflammation. So either this situation is something new, or the previous, the treatment he had in Europe wasn't that successful, or he wasn't necessarily following orders and he's trying to get back a little bit sooner. I think, with everything that's going on, and Urlacher is not going to say one way or the other, nor is the team, it's very difficult to know whether to expect him to be ready to play in week 1. At minimum, if he does, this is something that's probably going to linger, something that's probably going to limit him. But given what the Bears have on the depth chart, they've got Nick Roach there, who's okay, but certainly no Brian Urlacher. They've got Geno Hayes there, who's not a middle linebacker, and they've got him a little bit out of position on the strong side. I think they're going to want him, they're going to allow him to come back and play 85, 90%, even if he's not the same sideline to sideline, Tampa 2 get back in the middle of the zone there type of player. So we'll see how that progresses, but I think it's unlikely that we see the Urlacher of 2 years ago anytime soon.
Gene, this has been a rough preseason for running backs. We've seen Ryan Matthews get hurt. Marshawn Lynch, we had to worry about that arrest. We talked about Darren Sproles. We haven't talked about Trent Richardson yet, but he had that knee surgery. We've seen a lot of running backs fall from the ranks of that top 5 to 12 range. And everyone, of course, runs to safety. And where do they run to safety? Who's going in the mid to late first round consistently? Now, of course, the safest running back in fantasy football, Darren McFadden. And this is a chance for us to talk about this subject that we touch on every week. But I want you to talk about it with this specific context of Darren McFadden going in the mid-first round, late first round at the latest, because of what's happened at the running back position, and the idea of injury-prone players. Someone stops you on the street, whatever, one of your high school buddies sends you an email. I'm thinking about McFadden in the first round, but he's been hurt every year of his career. Am I crazy? Are people crazy for feeling like he's safe and worth a first-round pick, even though he's had injury after injury in his career?
Well, look, as we said time and again, it would be silly to deny that some players seem to be more injury-prone than others. But it's also, I think it's fallacy to try to predict whether or not that quote-unquote injury-prone player will have an injury again in the future. Maybe, if you were able to sit in the exam room and find out if his joints were a little bit loose or his hamstrings were a little bit tight, or his frame wasn't big enough to support the muscle that he had, or his athleticism was just questionable enough where he couldn't get himself into a position to absorb a hit by the reaction time, or his, somewhere down the line we do some Star Trek type stuff where we can decide, look at a guy's genes and say, well, maybe his connective tissue and all those sorts of things is a little bit more likely to be injured than another. All of those things are possible, probably likely, contributing factors, but can you with 100% certainty say that Darren McFadden fits a profile where even if he starts out and has a great first 2 to 4 weeks, that by week 6 to 8, you're going to be missing him? I don't think you can do that. So I still think it's worth considering what his previous injuries were. If it's been the same injury every time, the same situation, if they seem to be conditioning injuries, if they seem to be, he breaks down at the same time every year, and I don't know that we can say that with McFadden. I don't think that we can. Liz Frank injury isn't necessarily something that screams, bad protoplasm, so to speak. Unless you can say that specifically about a player, I think you have to go into the season expecting that, every player is going to miss some time. Maybe McFadden's a little bit more likely than another player who hasn't had an injury. But that other player that hasn't had an injury, let's say, just for lack of a better, just looking down the list here, you almost have to pick a rookie here because going down, Ray Rice has had bruised thighs. Arian Foster has had hamstring problems. LaShawn McCoy's been pretty healthy, but Ryan Matthews, MJD, DeMarco Murray, Chris Johnson, all of these guys have had their injuries and issues over the years. And if you want to say that a guy that's had 3 issues is a higher risk than 2 issues, then bump him down your draft board a little bit. But with respect to Darren McFadden, as well as he's been playing over the past couple of years after he's made some adjustments to his running style, and with his upside in that offense and on that depth chart, I don't see any reason not to consider him in the mid-first to late first round.
Gene, let's talk about another running back who's playing tonight, Chris Wells. He had a couple of decent runs, I would say, in the first half of this Titans game, and he's coming off of the well-publicized surgery that he had off season, and you've talked good enough about that. So could you revisit that a little bit and tell me what you would be looking for from him if you were to watch this game, maybe a replay of it, and what you want to see to feel a little bit more comfortable about him? Especially because of the fact that he's going off the board around the same time as somebody like Peyton Hillis, Roy Halou, Isaac Redmond, Stephen Ridley. These are some of the backs that you're going to be looking at right now, as well as wide receiver like Pierre Garçon or Torrey Smith.
Well, I think I would like to see from Wells what we've seen from Ryan Williams, and that is a willingness to stick his foot in the ground and move based on what looks like instinct rather than gathering to take an extra half step before he makes that cut. We saw from Ryan Williams last week, and I haven't watched the game yet tonight, but it sounds like from the reports on Twitter and otherwise, what we saw from him this week as well is a willingness to put his feet under him and move. And it didn't seem like he's as Cecil said about Michael Vick, he doesn't seem like he's thinking his way through the play. He looks like he's reacting and moving. The other nice thing we saw from Ryan Williams last week is he got tripped up behind the line of scrimmage, almost went down, took 5 or 6 stumbling steps, which put a fair amount of strain on that knee, and didn't seem to miss a beat. Got up, finished the run, looked fine. Those are the same things I think you want to see out of Beanie Wells. The main thing we want to see out of Beanie Wells, though, is some progress. I want to make sure that he's not in the training room for the next 2 or 3 days, that he's back on the practice field, if not tomorrow morning, by Saturday. I think those are the big things with Wells at this point. And from what again, just reading on Twitter, and you never want to trust everything somebody says, always look at it for your own eyes, and we'll be doing that certainly as the next week goes along. Didn't sound like Wells was nearly as impressive as Williams was. Not to say that he can't get to that point. He's probably 3 or 4 weeks at least behind where Williams is conditioning-wise and comfort-wise. But I think we want to see him make it through a couple of back-to-back practices, not struggle with the swelling, and then come back and look better next week than he did this week.
He's Gene Bramall. You can follow him on Twitter at Gene Bramall, and you can check out footballguys.com and BramallSecondOpinion.com. Bookmark it, and always tune in to what the great Dr. Gene Bramall has to say. Gene, my man, good to talk to you again as always, brother, and we'll talk to you soon.
Same to you guys. Have a great rest of your show. Talk to you next week.
All right, there we go. He is officially awesome. I think that hashtag was created for him. He is Gene Bramall, Dr. Gene Bramall, every Thursday night checking in the latest injury news and notes from around the National Football League. It's hour number 2, and the chat room has kicked off. Bloom, what's the chat room fired up about now?
I think there's some Lance Armstrong talk, and even though I'm in Austin, I should probably refrain from joining that conversation. But otherwise, I think that, as usual, we have our typical quipsters and jokesters and occasional good fantasy talk, too.
There we go. And we go in the second hour to the Shark Pool, the message boards at footballguys.com, and we appreciate everyone for participating in this show. It is the Audible Live, and make sure if you listen to this show, you don't know about the other shows, make sure you check out the Audible and check us out on iTunes and comment and rate us. And thank you very much for all of your input on this show and our other shows, including the Beat Writer Tour, which is continuing. More great interviews from the Beat Writer Tour this weekend. Not going to spoil, chasing some big names, not going to spoil them for the listeners. We'll get those up next week, probably Monday. So, again, thanks all for out there, for subscribing, for checking out the show, for commenting on iTunes, and just being a part of what we do, because we've done this for 6 years now, and it's fantastic and a true blessing to be able to interact and to discuss and to share this great passion, which we call a passion for the National Football League. Now, Bracy Smathers is the first to chime in, and an update on the following rookie quarterbacks. Well, Matt, I got to ask you about Russell Wilson, because we've seen this guy get his shot now to be the starter for the Seahawks. Initially, a week ago we had the report, if Matt Flynn were to stumble, it's Flynn's job to lose, was essentially how it was painted. And we see in games against the Denver Broncos last week, Russell Wilson, of course, had a very nice performance. He's done good this preseason, working against second and third and 14 units. Now it's the big time. He gets the preseason Week 3 game, and we get to see what he's got. and to see if he can, in fact, win that starting job. And, we've got plenty of talk in RG3 and Andrew Luck and Whedon, of course, Tannehill now. Russell Wilson is there. Your thoughts on Wilson this preseason, Matt, and does he essentially continue to wrestle that job away from Matt Flynn? Matt Flynn hasn't looked terrible, but he also hasn't looked like a world beater. He's looked like, Matt Flynn.
Yeah, Cecil, this is actually Russell Wilson's job to win. That's another way of looking at it, as it being Matt Flynn's job to lose. And Wilson has done enough to thrust himself into a situation where they're going to put him in a third game. He's going to get a chance to be in a situation where the defenses are going to be game planning against him, and they're going to be game planning against the defense. That's what this third game is all about here. And what we've seen from Wilson that is encouraging, that we're going to want to see against these first-team defenders, is his ability to throw the ball, throw a receiver open, to be aggressive downfield, to make plays with his feet, get onto the edge, and find an open man, to be able to be safe and secure with the football. These are all things that Russell Wilson showed, consistently at Wisconsin and at NC State. When he was with both of those college teams, he showed the ability to read the blitz and adjust, to be aggressive and throw receivers open in a way that you see Aaron Rodgers do or Drew Brees do at the NFL level. The difference is, of course, the speed of the game, the complexity of the game in the pros. And Wilson is going to have to show that he has a little bit of promise of doing that while not making mistakes. If he plays mistake-free football, and he makes throws that maybe even if the plays don't turn into completions, but the ball is in the right place, and maybe Braylon Edwards drops it, or one of his receivers makes a poor decision, but Wilson's making the good decision, this could become very close. And it could be something as close as maybe week 4, week 5, if they're on a losing streak in Seattle, and it's a matter of, some mistakes that Matt Flynn made or some inconsistencies, they may decide to put Wilson in there. And you got to remember that the locker room really does like Wilson. And I think that Wilson has been described as one of the most impressive leaders as a young man at the quarterback position that some people have ever met, in terms of getting the chance to talk with this guy, at the level that he was at in terms of his development. So there's a lot of promise here, and certainly he is someone you want to watch and consider as at least a waiver wire pick and maybe even a late round pick if you're in a very deep league or a 2-quarterback league.
Some people have a chip on their shoulder. Russell Wilson has a city block on his shoulder, all concrete. Seriously, the guy just incredible to watch him play this preseason. Now, we've spent plenty of time with Ryan Tannehill. I still believe he has the best pocket presence of any rookie quarterback this year. And, what are you going to do? Go with Matt Moore? Of course, Ryan Tannehill. And Brandon Whedon, while I think us three aren't exactly his biggest fan, you do have to give him credit for just firing away. I mean, he's got the Brett Favre gunslinger type mentality. He lacks, the elusiveness or athleticism or scrambling ability for Brett Favre, but he'll go down swinging and, he'll keep trying, and that's good news for guys like Greg Little. Nick Foles is there, though, Bloom, and this is where I toss it to you, because I think you and I were quite vocal, and please mistake me or correct me if I'm mistaken. You and I were quite vocal about, being in the anti-Nick Foles camp. You saw an arm. You also saw Kreiner bail him out a lot in college. This preseason, we're seeing him look more comfortable. He can move a little bit. He's not a scrambler, but he moves enough, maybe more so than Whedon. But Foles is there. We've seen some really good plays from him this preseason, including that Week 1 game, of course, against our beloved Pittsburgh Steelers. But I want your thoughts, and he's going to have to continue to prove it, and not in the, Graham Harrell with McCarthy. It's never going to work out for Harrell in my eyes. With Foles and Morningweg and Reed, you give him some time. It is the preseason. You have to take it with that grain of salt, as we like to say. But your thoughts on Foles so far after 2 weeks, and has your opinion not drastically changed, but are you saying, right on, kid?
Well, actually I wasn't in the anti-Foles camp, not certainly the large factions there were before the draft. I didn't expect him to go in the 3rd round, but I saw a few things on film. I liked the way he moved in the pocket. He did have good natural arm talent. He liked arm strength there. And obviously they like what they have in him so far. With Mike Kafka being hurt, Trent Edwards isn't going to do anything. And what's interesting to follow here is watching these third and fourth preseason games and seeing how Foles does is going to be the lasting impression for now. We'll see if Foles is the primary backup during the season, and maybe he'll get a chance to leave an even more lasting impression during the season this year. But Michael Vick is due about $15 million, I think, next year, and only 3 of that is money that they're going to have to pay regardless, guaranteed, I think, regardless of injury. They had to let him go. They would save $12 million. And if Vic continues to get banged up at the rate that he has in the preseason, they may hesitate. And the other part of that equation, the variable, is how confident they feel in Nick Foles. So this should be a very interesting one. A quarterback maybe that they don't flip for a second-round pick in Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie or just a second-round pick, but a quarterback that they may hold on to because they're ready to move on from the one they have.
Well, Sweetness34 chimes in with hashtag motorboat, so I must
They look
play
pretty good,
this.
are they real? Are they built for speed or for comfort? What'd you do with them? Motorboat? You play the motorboat? You motorboating son of a bitch, you old sailor, you.
12-team best ball waiver. I'm not going to read every single player he lists here, Matt. These guys are available. Who do you like? You see the list in front of you. He's thinking about dropping Emmanuel Sanders. I wouldn't do that. Or maybe Pierre Thomas. Not exactly crazy about that either. But you see the names, including guys, like Green is there, and LeSure, who, Motorboat was originated because of LeSure. We've talked a little bit about Alex Green on this show. Tannehill there as well. Dropping Emmanuel Sanders, maybe Pierre Thomas. Is there any one of these players from this list that jump off at you as a guy that you would do that for? Matt, what say you?
I'm going to give you a couple that I think that are worth considering over Pierre Thomas, as long as Sproles and Ingram are going to be the factors that we anticipate them to be. And if that's the case, I would probably look first at Bilal Powell, mainly because of his upside and the fact that Sean Green thinks he's Jerome Bettis, and he doesn't have the feet to be Jerome Bettis. He's actually Lendale White, and that's going to be part of the problem. And as we've seen with Rex Ryan, with Sean Green and with Wayne Hunter this week, once you start playing poorly a little bit, he's going to give you a quick hook. And Powell's been playing extremely well, and we've already heard from Rex Ryan, even at the beginning of camp, that Powell looks like a different guy. And when he says a different guy, meaning from last year, and not what they saw of him at Louisville when they were high-fiving, he and the GM, Tannenbaum, high-fiving each other for picking him up in the 4th round. This is what they expected from Powell the first year, but nagging injuries and a slow uptake in terms of adjusting to the offense derailed his opportunities to really make the type of impact that he was capable of. So I think Powell has the most upside. I'd also look at Vic Ballard, mainly because DeLon Carter hasn't really done a whole lot, and the fumble issues you kind of worry about, and it seems like that the head coach for the Colts really likes Ballard. And Ballard is an all-around player who, shows the ability to catch the ball. And if he's shown more burst than what I saw at Mississippi State, then certainly if Pagano likes what he sees, then you got to trust that a little bit. So I would say those are the 2 guys that I might consider. And then 2 more that I would keep an eye on as this is going on would be Jerome Simpson, later down the line, but he's going to be more of a waiver wire play you can get later. And then maybe one of these rookies or Vereen, if you can see that this backfield situation sorts out a little bit more.
Bloom, which one of these do you like better in 3-quarter PPR for wide receiver, half PPR for running back? Ryan, Trent Richardson, Harvin, or Cutler, Murray, and Marshall? So you got that Bears combination in that second one. Which one of those pairings or trios do you like better, Bloom?
Harvin and Marshall are wash. I prefer Murray to Richardson, but not as much as I prefer Ryan to Cutler. I like Cutler this year. I think Cutler is potentially underrated. If the line can hold up, he could get back into the top 10, 12 fantasy quarterbacks. But Matt Ryan is the one with a chance to rival top 5. So I would say the first combination.
And the final question about Peyton Manning throwing to his right. Yes, he can throw to his right. I've got several thoughts on this. I'll try to keep it brief. I talked to John Clayton when he was at Dove Valley for a day, and do Clayton show about once a month. and exchanged text messages with him once in a while. He's fantastic. And he noted at that practice the struggles in throwing to the right for Peyton Manning. Now, this isn't a deep throw on a 9 route. In fact, there was a play, I believe it was about 2 days after Clayton had left Broncos camp, there was a play where Manning threw it 60 yards on a rope. I've described the 55-yard touchdown pass to Eric Decker in practice in the bubble, and that was, had proper air under it and allowed Decker to run underneath that. This was an absolute laser on a rope, 60 yards to the right, on his right side. Not that type of throw. This isn't the deep arm is not the question. Can he put air underneath it? Yes. Did he push off and get that rope throw to Decker 60 yards? Yeah, he did that in practice. Where we're seeing him struggle to the right side is drive throws, what I call window throws, where he has to go over the linebacker in front of the safety. In that window, if he's throwing over everybody, he can do that. And he can do that with either air underneath it or, as he proved in practice, he could do it with zip to the right side. So when my Twitter started blowing up yesterday, and people were like, oh, report coming out. And, it was Bill Williamson who had commented and got some input from great friend of the show, Matt Williamson. And Bill's an awesome guy, too. He's a good friend of the show. And from John Clayton. This is where that comes from. It comes from the conversation and the observations that Clayton had when he was out at Dove Valley earlier this year. To say that he can't throw to the right is poppycock. I can say that. So, to say that he struggles with window throws to the right, that is something that doesn't look as crisp or as clean as it does to the left, that is more precise in my eyes. What is most concerning to me, and, I've released a couple of ESPN blogs about thoughts on Manning. What did we learn on this? So you know where to check it out at denversportstation.com. The concern with me is the flutter passes when he has to put some extra pepper on it. It seems like there is a delay in his reaction or anticipation. And when he's a little bit late on the throw, when his timing is there and the timing with the receivers is there, then it's a throw, it's on point, it's a tight spiral, it's right to the spot. And as I said, he can drop it into window throws. But when he seems to be a little bit late, or he sees a guy break open at the last second and then he turns to fire, it's not quite the same yet. And whereas I'd said before the preseason about 85%, I drop it back to about 80. We're seeing that if you're late on that throw, he's not quite making those. And when he tries to go with that extra pepper, he gets the bobble passes, and those are passes that get intercepted, as we've seen with the red zone interceptions with Peyton Manning. So it's a work in progress. I've already advised Broncos fans locally that they could start 1-3 in September. I could see the Steelers hammer them to open up the season and the struggles to continue with that second roughest schedule in the National Football League. But know that with Peyton Manning, he's not going to go down and say, well, that's it, I can't do it. His drive and his motor and his work ethic, and he's pissed. I got to tell you, from a guy that, talked to him after games and out at Dove Valley, he's upset with himself, and there's no one that will drive him more, to do more. He's going to do everything he can in his power to look like the Peyton Manning of old. But for all the reports, and read the report closely, from what Clayton said, from what both the Williamsons said, and it is accurate. But for, the Twitterverse, and it's only 140 characters, so I understand. But for the Twitterverse to go nuts saying he can't throw to his right, that's obviously false. Let's move on in the thread here, and this one comes in from Cullen Coyote. How much do you take into account a player's schedule when considering where to rank them? As an example, Tom Brady, extremely difficult fantasy playoff schedule. It made me reluctant to draft him despite loving his situation. Thanks, as always, guys. Matt, I'm going to toss that one to you because you look at, especially a guy like Tom Brady. It's Tom Brady. In a closer situation, if we're talking about players later down the rankings, that's where a schedule, I glanced at the playoff schedule, Matt, I'll be honest. But for Tom Brady, it's Tom Brady. And, outside, weather conditions, whatever, tough matchup, it's Tom Brady, man. I don't see that as being an issue. What about you?
Let's keep it simple. There's a lot of variables, Cecil, that go into looking at schedule. That's player injuries that we don't know about yet, player movement that affected the scheme into the preseason, changes in coaching staff that affected the scheme into this next coming season before the schedule came out, retirement, the draft. All of these things go into whether a schedule is going to be simple or hard, player development from one year to the next. All of these things make a factor involved in this, and we're not going to really see this manifest until the first month of the season. And once that happens, then I think it's time to start looking at schedule. Then it's time maybe to make some adjustments with players in your league once you get down the road here. But right now, I find it pretty useless. I don't look at it at all.
Back to the Shark Pool, and we talked a little bit about Ryan Williams a little bit before Truly Yours, and certainly we love the talent situation. Thompson chimes in, and perhaps it's Ballard, which we did talk about a little bit earlier as well, Bloom. But running backs to take a flyer on Sigmund, Vic Ballard, Isaiah P., Joik Bell, Alex Green, or Sean Drawn. Who do you like?
Well, I'm going to toss some different names out. I like Ballard is probably the best name on this list. Pete is someone that you would take and hold on to and see if Steven Jackson gets hurt, not so much a flyer. And that's why I don't love running backs like that you take and they clog up a roster spot before you know what you have. I like some guys with some instant payoff, and I'll tell you two that I'm zeroing in on right now. One is Alfred Morris. And if you listen to the show regularly, this is not the first time or even the third or fourth time you've heard Alfred Morris. We've been cluing you in on him for a while now. And the thing about him is with Evan Royster now battling knee soreness, Achilles tendonitis, and, of course, Tim Hightower coming back from the torn ACL, Alfred Morris is the healthiest running back there. And Shanahan likes him. He's been giving him work. He's like a Mike Anderson, a running back, fullback tweener, determined downhill runner. So you take out, people say, I'm not going to even go near Washington running backs. I want no piece of that. So you take Alfred Morris in the 16th or 18th round, and in the first game he's a healthy scratch, which doesn't necessarily mean he won't be the starter in the next game. We're talking about Mike Shanahan, of course. What did you lose? 16th, 18th round pick. Take Alfred Morris and see what happens in this Washington backfield. We've already laid that groundwork where we know that this is going to be a potent running game. The other guy that I'm interested in taking late in drafts right now is Curtis Brinkley. And we didn't go over the Ryan Matthews ground again with Dr. Gene. Listen to some of the last few Thursdays to get that. But he's probably going to miss a game or two no matter what he says. And they have Ronnie Brown. He's used up. He's done. They have Ron McClain. He's still going to play more fullback. Jackie Battle is a special teamer. Come on. Curtis Brinkley is a good running back. And Curtis Brinkley is a player that I think can come right out of the gate and get the best part of the committee for that first game and show he belongs. And then you have value as a high-value backup if Matthews gets hurt, or when Matthews comes back, or even the week after week one, you flip him to the Matthews owner, who has a lot of use for him. And if you're a Matthews owner and you take him in the second or third round and you need help, and you don't take, say, Kevin Smith to cover that first week or two, somebody like that, I think that taking Curtis Brinkley is a pretty smart move.
Well, and here's another reason why you love this show, and not just the Thursday Night Live show, but also the Beat Writer Tour, which I talked about earlier. Back on August 15th, we released the episode with Derek Togerson from NBC7 in San Diego. So this was, about 10 days ago. He said at that time, Brinkley is the guy. Don't forget about Brown, as you said. Forget about McClain and Battle. Please. He said Brinkley was the guy that everybody in San Diego wants to see more from. So, stay on top of the game, stay on top of your fantasy league, and kick the crap out of your friends, because that's what it's really all about. And check out our Beat Writer Tour, which is continuing. Of course, Bloom had an interview with George Bremer, Colts beat writer from the Herald Bulletin. That was chock full of fantastic insight as well, and about guys like Donald Brown, Andrew Luck, and building chemistry in that Colts passing game. It is the Audible. We're here year-round. This is episode 111 on this season, and we go back to the Shark Pool, the message boards at footballguys.com. Raw dog! What was the old saying about raw dog? I'll save that for a different show. This one says, having a hard time choosing between Chris Johnson and DeMarco Murray in a non-PPR league. Can you help me parse these two guys out? Does it come down to offensive line or schedule? Now, Matt, earlier in today's show, I asked you about Chris Johnson, the concerns about the offensive line. Compare him to DeMarco Murray, which we look back last season. Of course, Murray had the big game against the Rams, but remember, people, it was the Rams. And, obviously, Fiametta's not there, and many things are changing with the Dallas Cowboys. So if it comes down in non-PPR to Johnson or Murray, who do you like, Matt?
Cecil, this is one of those questions that Raw Dog could ask me tomorrow and the day after that, and I might flip-flop on it, because just before the show, earlier today, I had Chris Johnson ahead of DeMarco Murray and explained that when you look at DeMarco Murray's offensive line, the two guards are really not playing very well, and it's really more in the pass protection area of their game that it's really suffering. But that could mean that defenses load up the box and dare the Cowboys to throw, because they're going to have an open season on Tony Romo, and we know what happens there. But on the same token, we're looking at Chris Johnson, and this team has seemed somewhat predictable with Johnson running to the edges of the defense, and they've had some trouble running up the middle. When I look at these two backs, certainly Chris Johnson is by far the better big play threat than DeMarco Murray. But when I look at these guys in their all-around game, I think DeMarco Murray actually is better at making the first man miss, breaking the first tackle, being able to take what the defense, the offense gives him. Let's remember, Matt Forte hasn't had much of an offensive line, and he's been gangbusters. And I think that you look at DeMarco Murray, he could do similar things in this type of an offensive scheme. So I've actually put DeMarco Murray just slightly ahead of Chris Johnson, and it doesn't matter to schedule me at all. It's just a matter of who is the better player that's going to make the offensive line look good. And I think in this case, Murray has already shown that a little bit. Chris Johnson, when the offensive line struggled, he hasn't looked as good as he once was.
Voodoo Rage is into the Audible drinking game, Bloom, because he brings up clarity. By the way, Sigmund, unfortunately I did not get it edited tonight to put in as a drop, especially when Gene was on. There's a new phrase. What did you put in the email? The new phrase we've got to coin that will debut soon on this show, because we got a nice drop from Mr. Gene Bramwell.
Yeah, it's a Bramwell moment. And as some of you probably already know or suspect, I think every now and then some of these things make it through. There are things that are edited out of our shows, and Gene is almost always on top of things. But that's what makes it so much fun, the rare time that he isn't, and you get to hear him vocally fumble for something. And then a little later in the show, the great guru John Norton had a little trouble remembering something. He said, I'm having a Gene moment. So from now on, I hope we all excuse ourselves when we have those Bramwell moments.
Once in a while. It happens to the best of us, okay?
Yeah.
Once in a while you're going to get that Bramwell moment. But Voodoo Rage says, gentlemen, need some clarity. It's your cue to take a drink. One of my leagues has only a 12-round draft with 10 teams. All right. With such a deep waiver wire, what draft strategies might you recommend differently than a typical 15 or 16-round draft? Thanks so much. We talk about slim pickings in those 14-team or 16-team or 20-team drafts, Bloom, but this one's a 12-round. It's only 120 guys off the board. How's that change your strategy? Just keep drafting superstars? What are your thoughts here, Sigmund?
Yeah, it'd be great if you could keep drafting superstars for all 12 rounds. But I think what it means is you have to avoid any player that you have to wait around on. Somebody like David Wilson, who eventually could take over in the Giants' backfield. How many weeks can you go without? You can't even have anybody clog up a roster spot for more than 2 or 3 weeks. I think a backup quarterback is pointless. A backup tight end is pointless. I think you need to focus on players who can tell you something earlier in the season, and you don't worry so much about things like durability. A player like Malcolm Floyd, I think, has more value. Again, a player like Randall Cobb that you may have to wait on for a little bit, I would be staying away from in a draft like this. So you have to have players that you aren't going to feel so wedded to. You can't drop them because the waiver wire is going to be churning all year, and whoever can take the best advantage of that will probably win the league.
It is the Audible live each and every Thursday night, blogtalkradio.com/the Audible. Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, reunite. What is it? Peaches and Herb? What is the name of that group, Bloom? You're the disco guy. It's Peaches and Herb. Okay, yeah. That's what I thought. Reunited, and it feels so good. Cutter43 wants to feel good about Jimmy Graham, Matt. The latest on this back injury, it has been really quiet out of New Orleans. Jimmy freaking Graham, though. How much of a concern is this? Do you kind of categorize this, Matt? And we heard Gene comment on the Darren Sproles issue where he's like, I'm not worried. Do you categorize it kind of the same way as, the Saints just being safe here with Jimmy Graham? Again, it has been really quiet. Cutter43 asks, should he be worried? Are you worried, Matt?
I honestly don't know enough about it to really comment, Cecil.
Well, there we go. And, hardly anybody does because they've been so quiet about it. Bloom, you're the biggest Jimmy Graham fan on the show. Are you worried about it?
You have the same thing going on with Jimmy Graham and Marshawn Lynch now, and they both had issues last year. Lynch was a late scratch. Graham was almost a late scratch. Back issues. Lynch has had some back issues flare up. He's not going to play this weekend because of it. And I think that last year shows us. I mean, yeah, there might be a week that you're having to scramble. You're going to have to. If you have Jimmy Graham or Marshawn Lynch, you have to wait until game time every week to be really, really sure. You may even look at your roster when they play late games and say, do I have someone to swap in there just in case? But we also saw last year, second half of the year, Lynch, Graham, most of the year, they were the class of their position. So battling the back issues last year, they were elite. No.
Well, we always talk about changing directions or changing situations. The new reality, I think, is what you say, Sigmund. He brought up Marshawn Lynch there, Matt. So I want to throw this to you about the guy behind Marshawn Lynch that some in the scouting community had compared to this, my son, in Robert Turbin. And, I'll talk about the Broncos game because it is a Broncos show, right? I like Terrell Sutton more. And we see him running through. Nate Irving, be ashamed of yourself, running through tackles. And, I get excited when I watch Sutton run. I'm not necessarily excited when I'm watching Turbin. Your thoughts, Matt, as we've seen this rookie a couple of preseason games.
I haven't really been a Turbin fan for quite a while, and I do think that he has the physical skills to develop into a good back, but I don't think he makes great decisions. I think he's used to running in a power scheme with a lot of counter plays, and hasn't really displayed the decision making that you want to see from a back of his size. In fact, I would say that Michael Smith, the Tampa Bay running back, who was the backup to Turbin at Utah State, was a more decisive runner and used his pads better than Robert Turbin did. And I think that you're even seeing Craig Lumpkin show a little something that that Robert Turbin hasn't had. So to me, they're going to give him a chance to do what he needs to do. But I think that Pete Carroll feels confident enough with his depth that he could put Leon Washington in there, Terrell Sutton, if they keep a fourth or fifth pack. I don't know if they will. They're probably not going to do that. But I think that they're going to feel okay about their depth to put someone in there if Turbin struggles right away, but still give him enough of a chance to gain some confidence and maybe do something different with it.
So if you're a Lynch owner, Matt, are you just not handcuffing? I know everyone loves handcuffs, love to talk about it, but are you just saying, nah, no thanks?
Yeah, no thanks on those handcuffs. They're a little too much fur on the handcuff there.
The furry ones are okay. Okay, it's always good sometimes to break out the toys. Jay Carvin chimes in. Jay Carvin, that's a special Audible drinking game. Special sex. This one from Jay Carvin. I'm getting way off track, and my mind is drifting. I'd like to hear your take on a strategy that I've used in the past. Bloom, I'm gonna kind of shrink up this question because he's pissing off his owners. It pisses off the people in his league, where he's really makes a push for the championship every other year. He uses his down year. He's not necessarily tanking, but he's, shades of tanking, I guess we shall say. Not shades of gray. No fuzzy handcuffs here, but shades of tanking here where he trades future draft picks, and he's really active in that off year, and he sets himself up, and then he makes a championship run. Bloom, I read this, and I thought your answer immediately would be like, it's in the rules. If it's not lined out in your league's constitution that you can't do this, then why would people get pissed off? Bloom, is that your answer?
it is within reason, and you still have to field a competitive team. I mean, you can't start players who aren't playing. You can't start players that are clearly not going to do anything. You can't strip your roster of so much value that you can't field a competitive team. Then you're doing things like giving an unfair advantage to teams who may have had you later in the schedule instead of earlier in the schedule, because by the end of the year you're not going to do anything. That's within the commission's discretion. And I think that you have to have in every league constitution a clause that says, if the commissioner feels that behavior is hurting the competitive balance of the league, they can take action as they see fit. Some sort of discretion, because even if things are within the rules, doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for the league. And the best indicator of this are people's reaction to it. Now, he said people are still making him trades, and it simmered down. And one of the things I want to point out about this deal, strategy that he points out here is I don't like this idea that you trade picks in the following year's redraft. I mean, if it's a dynasty league where you're trading rookie picks, okay. If it's a keeper league even, every team's going to have 8 or 10 or even 3 or 4 keepers. If you're just redrafting every year and you're really trading your first-round pick in a redraft league to try to win a championship, I think it's the system that might be flawed here, and Jake Harvin is just taking advantage of the system. But that's what I would review if people do have a problem with this.
And don't have a league where you vote on trades, right? You should have a trade commission, but don't have other owners vote on trades whether or not they can pass. Yes?
It's the worst thing ever because people just they use spite. They get emotional. They get angry. They hate that someone got a better deal than what they could get. And the people band against each other, and it's terrible. So there's absolutely no way you should allow league owners to have a vote on whether trades stand.
Now, in my hybrid dynasty league, the Colorado Pigskin League, and it might be the guy that we replaced and gave Frank Schwab his team, but we did have a guy like this. And when it got to the point where he's starting guys that aren't playing, that's when we just boot him. So always have that hammer as a commissioner. Don't get it twisted. There's some friends in fantasy football. So it was a buddy of mine, and he was trying to get cute. He'd won a championship, kind of after a rough year. So then he decided hey, I'll just keep doing that. And he was sandbagging, and gave him the boot. Gave him that cowboy boot Spurs brought out. That's for a different show. PLNJA says, hey, guys, need a little help with my keeper league in a non-PPR league, Matt. He can keep Rodgers at 21 or Matthews at 45. Other notable keepers, Rice, Foster, Stafford, etc. 4 points for a passing touchdown, 6 points for a rushing or receiving touchdown. He has the 4th pick. He's thinking he could get Rodgers back at 4 or CJ and still have Matthews in the 4th. If I keep Rodgers, he's looking at McFadden or Forte at 4 and scrambling at running back in the 3rd with Gore or Turner. Thanks for any advice. If you've listened to this show, there's not a scramble in the 3rd round. I mean, in my opinion, Matt, your thoughts here on PLNJA's situation.
I think when you look at this, here's the deal. If you can get Rodgers back at 4 and keep Matthews, that's still pretty good. So to me, I like having Rodgers because this is, again, a keeper league. And when I look at keeper players, I want somebody who's going to be able to anchor my team for quite some time. And who better to be able to have as your anchor than a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, because the length of time that a quarterback excels in fantasy football tends to be longer than any position in the hobby. So there's a pro for that. But at the same time, in the 3rd round, you may still end up with Marshawn Lynch. And if you can get Marshawn Lynch in the 3rd round, there may be some, there's some opportunity there to keep Rodgers, get McFadden and Lynch. It may seem a little bit riskier on the surface, but I think that, we can talk about a little bit later, if need be, why we think that Lynch won't be suspended this year. And why, someone like Sigmund Bloom and I are looking at him as a bargain in the early 3rd round where he is often going.
Alexander Supertramp 215 says, hey, guys, 12-team PPR draft. And Bloomy Drew, your least favorite pick this season is at the turn. And he can flex that tight end, so he's thinking of going Graham Gronk at the turn. And some people, you make the suggestions, you take the phone calls, and Bloom, you've done it enough to know that some people get a little sick when you suggest go with Jimmy Graham in your format, in your league. You're sitting there at the end of the first. Go with Graham. Go with Gronk. He's thinking of doubling up, 12 and 13. Your thoughts on this strategy when you can flex that second tight end, Bloom?
I don't like it. I think that if you're in a tight end premium league, 1.5 per reception for tight ends and tight ends only, it's viable because, first of all, that's going to make Graham and Gronkowski probably outscoring every wide receiver not named Calvin Johnson. And in addition, what you're going to do, where tight end is a very important position, you're going to make it so you're the only one with that super uber elite scoring. And I suppose you still get that effect in a point per reception league, although it isn't as pronounced. But here's the problem with that. You are going to have probably the best flex in the league. Graham, Gronkowski score like top 5 wide receivers. You're going to have a top 5 wide receiver as your flex. But at the cost of getting a quarterback, a stud running back, at least a number 1 running back like Matt Forte, or perhaps if there's a wide receiver like Julio Jones who you think is going to hit and be the next Calvin this year, you miss that. And you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball, one of those positions. And the problem is, flex is a position that I like to use. You trust yourself that you're going to draft well, you're going to draft good depth at running back and wide receiver. You're probably going to find a good number 2 tight end in the second part of your draft if it's enough roster spots like, say, Kyle Rudolph. And you expect one out of those 3, 4, 5 players at the top of your bench to hit. And you lose any value in that if you use your second pick on a flex. So while I think it's kind of fun in theory to do something like that, unless the scoring for your tight ends are jacked up a little higher, I wouldn't do it.
Chat room is fired up. Chat room, react to me. And Gebs is he's lamenting no Game of Thrones. So, Bloom, could you please, for Gebs' sake, because Gebs is our boy, so I will do the Mormont, the Gerard Mormont, whatever his name is, and I will say, Khaleesi. But I want you to ask where your dragons are, Bloom, please.
Yeah, well, where are my dragons? Where are my running backs? That's what I really want to know. But yeah, it was like a little bit. It was the one part I like Game of Thrones, but whenever we would get to the part where she was asking where her dragons were, it was just a little petulant. She sounded like a child asking where her dollies were or something. So that and the dragon CGI, didn't love it. Otherwise, solid show.
Yeah. Don't sell yourself short on the dragon CGI or the battle at the end. The Sabretooth says the same thing. And he also says, hey, fellas, quick questions for those lucky enough to own the number 1 pick and it's 6 points for all touchdown leagues. Number 1 spot, Matt, but then the 24-25 turn. And after that, now Sabretooth's thinking Brady with the first pick, but then what? What do you like at 24-25? For those first 3 picks, this league is a flex, running back, wide receiver flex, with only 2 starting wideouts. Matt, you've got 6 points for every touchdown. Do you love Tom Brady at that spot? And then if you get Brady, when it finally comes back around to you, who are you looking at there? Who do you like?
That's a great question, Cecil. And for Sabretooth, who I know, has been joking or has been talking on the message boards about my love for Brandon Lloyd, I was going to joke and say he should take Brandon Lloyd. But I think that, obviously that's not the case. Really where he should be looking here is probably going to be either running back or quarterback. And when you're talking about the turn at that range of the draft, I mean, you're probably looking at someone like Marshawn Lynch falling to you. I like Marshawn Lynch here. He is the only game in town at running back. As long as he stays healthy, it might seem like a little bit of a risk, but to me, the offensive line is healthy. I think that he is going to end up having a double-digit touchdown season. Steven Jackson could be a safe pick if he makes it back around to you. Even someone, on that range, even Fred Jackson might not be a bad one to look at, but I would say that really your best bet if you're going to be looking at a running back is probably going to be hoping that Lynch falls to you there. It's going to be either Lynch, Jackson, Ryan Matthews, somewhere in that type of a range that you hope they can go. And then if you go with a running back there, then you're looking at, still you're looking at maybe Cam Newton falling to you. And if Cam Newton falls to you that late, especially because people might be down on him in the sense that they think that he's going to regress a little bit, or his stats were just a little bit too high there. I would say 6 points per touchdown. It would seem a little nutty to me that he would last as long as the end of the second round. But if he does, he's another one to keep an eye on. So just know, if you know this league and you think that the temperature's a little down on Newton, he might be the one you take in the second round and go with the running back. But otherwise, I agree with you on Brady. I think that he might be the safest bet for you, and then you can go with one of the running backs I suggested.
Easy money with a couple of questions. I'll save the second one, Sigmund. But the first one is strategy for the flex spot. Starting one quarterback, one running back, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 flex. Do you play that flex like a running back spot because you only start 1 back in this league? And it says 1 point PPR league. So there you go. So 1 point PPR, and isn't that point per reception? Either way, point is this. More points. How do you play that flex point? Help me out, Sigmund.
Yeah, I wouldn't play it strictly like a running back position because wide receiver is deep enough this year that you could play that flex as a wide receiver, and you might have a really strong 4th wide receiver. Maybe take someone like Kenny Britt as your 4th wide receiver if he pans out. Ooh, watch out. If you treat it like a running back position, you may overvalue some of the later running back 2s. I think that getting a running back 2 in the 3rd round and just playing it straight up like a running back position, if you land a Fred Jackson or a Marshawn Lynch or Ryan Matthews, someone like that, I think that's solid. But after that tier dries up and you're into the Ahmad Bradshaw's about the threshold, Doug Martin's the threshold, and then you're into Frank Gore and so on, I wouldn't feel any urgency to get that second running back, honestly. I would be hammering away at wide receivers, and I would probably be looking to start 4 wide receivers. So I wouldn't lock that in. And in general, I refer back to my answer to the previous question about how you just draft the best team and worry about the flex later, because if you draft well, you're going to have multiple players to choose from for your flex each week.
And the second question, I just want a yes or no from both of you and do it at the same time. I'll try to pick up. Is anybody against David Wilson on this show? I think we're all pretty pro David Wilson. Am I right?
Correct.
Yeah. I'm pro Wilson, but I would take Chris Rogers ahead of him.
Okay. Yeah, and Rogers, something that we haven't brought up yet is the struggles of Michael Turner in the preseason. They say they want to work more in the passing game. I almost spit up my coffee when I read that going through the newswire at footballguys.com. Listen, he had 300 carries. He's not going to have 300 carries. I mean, if he has 225, it sounds about right. Well, now Quiz in this cutter offense spinning around. So certainly Quiz there, Wilson. Now, Vereen, I don't think any of us don't like Vereen's talent. I personally don't like the situation. Does anyone want to make an argument like where you go to the mat for Shane Vereen? Either one of you guys?
I'm not going to go to the mat for Shane Vereen. Go ahead, Matt.
I'll say this. I would go to the mat for him at the round that he's being picked because you just never know if there's going to be enough injuries that he ends up being the guy, impresses well enough to be able to play his way into being what you would say is close to possible as being a feature back that you can get in New England. He certainly can catch the football out of the backfield. He's he's got the burst. He's a little tougher between the tackles than you might imagine. We haven't seen a lot of that in New England with their offense in the preseason right now, but that's not really where you're going to get a chance to see it. So to me, where he's being taken, it's worthwhile to look at him, but he's not someone that you're going to go hot and heavy about and say, I have to take him and reach for him a little bit in order for it to happen.
Yeah, in the 11th, 12th round, I think Vereen, basically echoing what Matt said, but the main thing is you're going to know more of what you have in Shane Vereen 2 or 3 weeks into the season than you do David Wilson or Ronnie Hillman. So this is the important takeaway from comparing these 3 guys, Wilson, Vereen, and Hillman, and just the idea of later round running backs in general. The key variable here is how deep is your bench? I just drafted a league the other night that was 16-man roster, so the waiver wire is going to be very fat. Now, Cecil brought up our staff leagues are 14 teams, 22 rounds. You're going to be digging extremely deep just at the end of that draft, and you're certainly digging deep on the waiver wire, so you're not going to cut or need to cut a David Wilson or a Ronnie Hillman to make room for some hot waiver wire pickup. You might be looking at your roster in week 2 or week 3 and needing to pick somebody up. And feel like maybe you're tired of waiting around for them. So just know that Shane Vereen, things can happen. I mean, Stephen Ridley's been banged up and fumbling already. Brandon Bolden is tailing off a little bit. Danny Woodhead, I think they're just looking at as a utility back. So we could see Shane Vereen get a lot of passing down snaps, some goal line touches, and some other things to make him have value right out of the gate. I think that Wilson and Hillman will be eased in. Wilson less so than Hillman. Hillman, the injuries, I think it's just impossible for him to have a big role early on in the season. But there is an important difference between these players, even though Wilson is definitely the most talented of the three.
Yeah, definitely. What's your bench like? Because, Bloom, when I was taking Bryce Brown in Cecil Alpha, you were taking Brandon Bolden, so we went with the Killer Bees there.
Right. Yeah, and in those leagues, you're never going to cut a David Wilson or Ronnie Hillman, no matter how bleak it looks. But in those shallow leagues, you need players that let you know what they're going to be this year pretty early on.
And I may be excited because Ronnie Hillman's going to play Sunday, finally. And by the way, for the hamstring injuries, the play that he felt some tightness, this wasn't, a pop or whatever, but the play where he felt some tightness again on the hamstring injury after he came back for a couple of days was on a 45-yard touchdown run where he was untouched. And not untouched because he couldn't be tackled. This was a live drill. And can't tackle him. Badgers fan says 7 quick over-unders. Since you liked it last week. Now I wasn't here last week, so Sigmund, you got to help me out here. What is this? What is that, a new segment here? Do we need to get the sponsor? Yeah. Do we need an intro for this? Now, what's going on with this over-under? How do we participate? How do we do this, Bloom?
I'll tell you what we need. We need the 60 minutes. Tick, 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 tick. I mean, Mike Wallace fits right in that. We need the 60 minutes. Tick, 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 tick. And this is those quick hitters where we don't give anything except that high level, the high level explanation. And the important thing is this really is an exercise in clarity. You get a player and a number, and you have to commit. They're going to come in above or below.
Okay, and do both of you or just one for each player?
We can either trade off or both chime in because it's a quick hitter. There's room for everybody.
Okay. Arian Foster, 2,000 total yards, 14 touchdowns, 54 receptions. Over, under. Bloom, what do you got?
2,000 yards is tough. I'm going to say over on the 14 touchdowns and 54 receptions.
Matt, what do you think?
Under on the yards, under on the touchdowns, and on par with the receptions.
Victor Crew, no relation to Motley, 80 receptions, 1,150 yards, 7 touchdowns. Sigmund, you like that. What? Oh, over, under. What do you got?
Over on the yards and touchdowns, break even on the receptions.
Matt, what are your thoughts?
I agree.
Des Bryant, 10 touchdowns.
Woo! Where's the crystal ball? Over, but nobody knows. Des doesn't even know.
I think he'll be on track by week 6 and derail himself by week 7. So under.
Eli Manning, 4,300 yards, 29 touchdowns. Over, under. Bloom.
I'll say right on par, but I don't expect him to have last year's numbers.
Matt.
I'm going to say over on the yards, and I'm going to say over on both.
Nice. Matt Ryan, 4,300 yards, but 31 touchdowns. If Mark Weimer was here, he'd say, hell yeah, you bet over. What about you, Bloom?
Yeah, I'm going to say over, and certainly over in that I would draft Ryan ahead of Eli Manning.
Ryan, 4,300, 31 touchdowns. Matt Waldman, what say you?
I agree. I would put him over Manning, too. I think he's the safest quarterback below the elite.
If I were to put that number, just back on Matt Ryan, because he's getting a lot of hype and a lot of buzz, and I love giving Weimer crap about his man love for Matt Ryan. Point is this. Bloom, if I put that number at 4,600 passing yards, are you over, under?
I'll still say over. I mean, it's insignificant to me. The point is, short of the Brady, Rodgers, Stafford, Breeze type numbers, Matt Ryan's going to be cruising just a 5 or 10% at the most below them.
Quiz Rogers, 40s receptions. Matt Waldman, go.
I will say over.
Over, and Bloom, I will assume over for you.
You know I'm saying over on that.
Titus Young, which if I read the chat room correctly, Bloom, you're You're already hot and bothered about Young, and now you're warming to it? What is this, some sort of warming gel? Right. What's going on here with Titus Young?
I think that Titus Young is somebody that can come and save you in the 8th or even 9th round if you maybe come out of the mid-rounds with only 2 wide receivers you feel good about. You've got Kenny Britt as your third. Titus Young is a player very quietly after that incident with Louis Delmas that he had to actually be away from the team for a couple of days, has been nothing but spectacular. And I think someone in the chat room put it well when they said he could become the Jordy Nelson this year. And what I take that to mean is he could become the player that defenses just leave in single coverage because they have no choice. You know, Calvin Johnson, Pettigrew, and he brought up Burleson in the slot, and we'll see if Brian Broyles can start to ease in there. But Titus Young has that speed. Apparently, his game has really come into focus this year. I love getting him as a wide receiver 4, especially in leagues like our Fessel leagues where you get distance bonuses for touchdowns.
Matt, you and I saw Titus Young in his underwear in Mobile. At the weigh-in, people, not at the hotel, at the weigh-in, Titus Young, we've followed him for a long time. Are you as smitten as Bloom here? What's the scoop? What's the story?
I've been writing about Young all week. I've been drafting Young in like 3 leagues this week, probably even a little in between the 7th and 9th round in every draft as my 3rd or 4th wide receiver. And everything that Bloom says I completely agree with, especially when you watch him play on the field in the preseason because he's not thinking anymore. He's actually just reacting, and he's reacting the way that you see as college football players when they were stars. And that's the thing that you might want to look at when you're looking at a player who is a young developmental prospect. Does he look similar to what he was doing at the college level? Is he not thinking anymore, but just reacting and using his athleticism the way that he used to? And that's something that Young, I saw Young do against the Ravens, run through Ed Reed on a play for a touchdown, and the way that he adjusted his body and knew where Reed was with his back to him, after a catch over the middle was impressive to me. Yeah, I mean, if it were up to me, I would probably find out where the manufacturing facility is where they're bottling that warming gel and buy a case of it.
The his and hers, it's pretty awesome. The Scarlet Pumpernickel. Oh, wait, that's Sylvester. No, it's Pumpnick. I'll leave that one alone. In a start 2 quarterback, does Nick want to be pumped? In the start 2 quarterback league, would you select your second quarterback, say the 12th to 14th ranked quarterback, over a top 3 to 5 wide receiver? Bloom, what do you think?
You have to. I think that in 2 quarterback leagues, you need to come out of the first 3 rounds with your 2 quarterbacks. If you are going to wait, you may get away with a Flacco or a Fitzpatrick, a Locker if you're lucky later on. But the reality is that top 3 to 5 wide receiver is not that much different than the 20th wide receiver, so I don't see any reason to rank them ahead of a second quarterback that is in the top 15 in a 2 quarterback league.
If the 3, I don't know. Cowboy's avatar says, yes, I'm here. And he says, what's the latest on the running back situation in Pittsburgh? Redmond, hip groin issues, Mendenhall off the pup. We talked about that a little bit with Dr. Gene. Matt, any input there, any vibes you're getting, any thoughts or feelings about Mendenhall as a late-round flyer for when he comes off, and is ready in the regular season, and Redmond in the first handful of games with the hip and the groin issue now?
Listen, Cecil, this is basically somebody tripped over the case of warming gel that I was just talking about earlier, and they all slipped over it. It's a mess in Pittsburgh. I think they need a custodian to come in there and clean up that mess before you even touch any of them.
We'll try to get through this one quickly. Vibebox checks in. Assuming best is finished, I love you guys. The majority seem to favor Smith over LeSure. We're going to go overtime on this one because I really wanted to get to this question. Most seem to favor Smith over LeSure. I can understand that Smith is more proven, but LeSure really seems like the better fit in the offense and the better back. Yes, Smith would have the first 2 games, but coaching staff seems clearly interested in giving LeSure a chance to be the guy. What, other than experience, is making people favor Smith so much more? Bloom, your thoughts on that? Because obviously Motorboat started because of LeSure. And for me, and I've been obviously Kevin Smith looks different than he did at Central Florida. He's running with more intent and more determination, and you like seeing that in the initial burst. I just don't think he can stay healthy. Now, I'm not saying that LeSure, who could battle through lower leg injuries all year because coming back from the Achilles injury and now this hamstring, I mean, it could just be nagging. If LeSure's healthy, for me, Bloom, I prefer LeSure. But a lot of people are loving on Smith. I want your thoughts, and then, Matt, we're going in overtime because I want to hear your thoughts as well.
Well, Smith, all things considered, risk-reward package in the 7th round, tough year at running back, is worth it. You take him, see what happens. LeSure, 10th, 11th, 12th round, as you said, you're going to have potential concerns. It would have been nice to see him run really well in the preseason. Maybe we still will see something, but he's been banged up for a lot of the preseason with that hamstring. And this is why we keep bringing up the names Joyce Bell and Keelan Williams, who's also looked good in the preseason. These are names that are going to be relevant at some point this year in the fantasy season, maybe earlier than we realize. And I think it'll be the same as last year. It's just Detroit's backfield will remain one that has value, but also one that is in constant motion.
Matt, your thoughts on Smith versus LeSure? And, first 2 weeks, of course, it's Smith, but does he stay healthy? Do you have those same concerns?
Well, I don't really have too many concerns about Smith staying healthy. I think a lot of it was just dealing with not being in a football camp all summer long and coming off the street, basically off the couch. Although he was working out hard, he was in good shape in terms of working out, but not football shape, and I think there's a difference there. So I'm not too worried about it because I think that he's held up well in the preseason. He's had a full training camp, so I feel good about that. And I think the reason that people like Smith more than LeSure doesn't necessarily have to do with skill, because LeSure is a very skilled back. There's no question about that. And the Lions invested a lot in him to be that guy, or at least be that powerful 1A complement to Best, and it just hasn't worked out yet. The reason they're worried about him is that he motorboats a bong pipe way too often.
Matt, quickly, and we'll save the comments on that for a little bit later. Maybe some more Wyoming Joe. I want to know, because in your and I's disagreements on running backs over the years, I think Kevin Smith was our first one. And you never forget your first, Matt. But what's he doing now differently? Because I watch Smith and I go, I didn't see that at Central Florida. I see a different player, again, more intent, more determined. What are you seeing from Smith? And are you seeing stuff that you had seen before, but an enhanced version? Because, he didn't look like this in his first incarnation, his first go-around with the Lions. He's looking better now. What is the difference, Matt?
Well, it's a good question, Cecil, because what I saw at Central Florida reminded me of Marcus Allen, kind of someone that when he was on his game, he played fast, he was able to make decisive cuts and the sharp, really great cuts of footwork to make people miss, but also finish with good power, get his shoulders down and be able to run through a little bit of trash and maybe even make the occasional breakaway run. What you didn't see early on in his career was typical, I think, of a running back making a transition when they didn't transition as fast as they should have. Thinking Smith probably just thought that he was going to be able to use his athleticism like he did at Central Florida to get by, and he was too tentative into the hole, so he'd make one too many cuts. He was thinking too much and therefore not as fast or as, showed as much of a burst. And I think things kind of slowed down for him over the years, even though we've only seen him sporadically between injuries. And I think that that's kind of the difference that you have to see there. It's the same thing that we're going to have to see from someone like Isaiah Peed, what we saw change with LaShawn McCoy, Jamal Charles, because let's face facts here, Cecil. Jamal Charles was a beast to me at Texas. I mean, and showed all the confidence in the world to say, I'm going to make you forget about Adrian Peterson when I come to Texas. Now, he didn't quite do that, but anybody who has the confidence to do it and back it up enough that you didn't make jokes about him is a pretty darn good running back. And he had a first season that was pretty forgettable in Kansas City.
Yes.
And it was pretty questionable whether he was going to be any good a second season because of the fumbling issues and also trying to bounce things outside, and he was fantastic. So I think that this is kind of the transition that you have to expect for running backs, and I think Smith has made that transition.
You've got to be an inside-out runner. Bloom, final sage-like advice as we're in overtime here. People are going to download this. They're getting a juicy extra 5 minutes here. This is a huge weekend for all of us drafting. So you're listening this Friday morning, you're driving to work, you're working out, whatever. Again, thanks everyone for listening, participating. Bloom, final thoughts. as we tie a bow on tonight's show for everyone out there, all of our precious listeners, as they enter this hypercritical week?
Draft players you like. Draft players you like. Don't worry about ADP. Don't worry about whether you're around too early. Don't talk yourself into taking somebody you don't really want because of position problems or a need or retaliation or greed or any of these other things. Just take players that you like, that you think are good players, and you'll be shocked at how well it works out.
He's Sigmund Bloom. You can follow him on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. He's officially awesome. Matt Waldman gets that same stamp of approval. And check out mattwaldmanrsp.com. And follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. Follow me at Cecil Lammey. The show is at The Audible. Thank you all very much for listening. So excited. Week 3 of the preseason, dress rehearsal for the regular season. And it's right here. All of our drafts going to be happening in the next 10 days, 2 weeks, and we love it. So thank you very much. We love you, and thank you for listening to the show, participating in the show. So for the great Sigmund Bloom and the fantastic Matt Waldman, I'm Cecil Lammey saying thank you very much for listening. As always, stay tuned, and oh yeah, you got to stay frosty.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.